Today we're talking about rules you are getting wrong when playing Warcry. Welcome to War Games on Toast, all of you lovely people. It's me, it's Toast, and today I am going to natter your bonds to death talking about rules people get wrong all of the time. I get these rules wrong from time to time because despite my well-adjusted strategic noggin being well and truly screwed on, things occasionally fall through the cracks. Huge shout out to Long Run Hobbies who suggested this video. But before we get into all of that funky stuff, please consider leaving a like, a comment and subscribing, as that helps me fight against that dastardly YouTube algorithmic demon. If you want to help in a more tangible way, then please consider signing up to my Patreon or my YouTube members, like these amazing people on screen now. If you do, you'll get access to pretty swanky perks like our first behind the scenes podcast with me and Mrs. Toast, which went live yesterday. And of course, our monthly giveaways. But with all of that out of the way, let's get on with the show.
And now for something completely different.
Before I get into rules that I have noticed get botched fairly often, I think it's important to go into the why. There are all kinds of reasons why people mess up, but I think there are 4 broad categories that can be delved into and explored. They are rules bleed, complex wording interactions or awkward rules placement, genuine human error, and of course, straight up cockwomble. Rules bleed is the one I find to be the most common. Very, very few people just play Warcry. Many people transition into Warcry from other games, or conversely, trans into games from Warcry, since there is a lot of overlap. Now, many Games Workshop systems have tangible overlap. This can be as simple as transferable stat lines to the concept of movement to combat itself. If you can play one Games Workshop game, you can probably play them all with a relatively small adjustment period. There are nuances to their games that make them different, and this is where rules bleed comes in. Did you know that some games count wounds up and other games count wounds down? I had no idea until very recently. Did you know that some games allow your opponent to get a minor loss whilst you still gain a major victory? Yeah, even Games Workshop staff mess that one up. What about Warcry objectives being sticky, or how objectives in Warcry once under the control of the player can't be contested? Going in with the assumption a system works one way because another system you play does it that way is a recipe for disaster. And of course, next up is just straight up complexity or the stupidity of rules placement. Warcry is a fairly straightforward game, but some rules are incredibly wordy, or they use very specific language to convey a rule. For example, a crit is not a hit, so anything requiring you to hit something would not work if you only landed a hit or multiple crits, plural. Heck, sometimes it's a mixture of the two, wordy rules with specific language. This happens all of the time. But the more you play and pick up on the nuances of how Games Workshop writes Warcry rules, the better you will get at parsing it. And of course, sometimes people just mess up. You can play 100 games and then one game you completely forget about a key rule, or you forget how a mission operates and make mistakes. This can happen for all kinds of reasons. Lapses in judgment, distraction, tiredness, stress, from the game or outside of the game. We aren't perfect, and it is fairly rare to play a whole game of Warcry and not make a mistake somewhere. And the final reason people get rules wrong is of course because they are straight up cheating. Not in a human error sense of cheating as in, you did a thing wrong, that's technically cheating. No, more like, this guy is intentionally lying, manipulating, or straight up breaking the rules on purpose. The solution to this is simple: avoid, report, and move on from these players. But let's jump into some common rules mistakes, starting with initiative. That's right, we are diving in with initiative, the phase of the game that even seasoned pros get wrong. Heck, I got this wrong for a while, and let me tell you, this falls under the awkward placement category and of course the rules bleed category. So initiative works as follows. At the start of the initiative phase, each player rolls 6 dice. These dice are the initiative dice. After rolling, each player counts how many singles they have. A single is a dice with a score that does not match the score on any other dice in that player's roll. The player with the most singles has the initiative. In the case of a tie, the players roll off and the winner has the initiative. Most players will straight up stop reading from here because the wording seems to be super clear. The player with the most singles has initiative. Surely this means if you have initiative, you go first, right? You can't hand the first activation to your opponent, right? Yeah, that's a negatory, Chief. This part specifically falls under rules bleed. People make the assumption that initiative means first, and then they go on to assume, since it doesn't say anywhere, and I mean anywhere, under the initiative phase, that you get a choice and that you must go first. And now we get to the awkward placement. If you flip to the combat phase, you get this wonderful line. In the combat phase, the players take it in turns to activate a fighter. The player with initiative picks which player takes the first turn. Half the games I played at Warhammer World had players getting this wrong. Heck, incredibly talented players who placed in the top 10 of the event got this rule wrong. This is huge for dictating the flow of a battle. Just remember, specific wording is very important here. Initiative and going first are two different things. Just because you let your opponent go first in a game like Ley Lines does not mean you get to activate the objective. Is initiative weirdly complex? Yeah, it is. But that's not all, because initiative gets even more complex. Seizing initiative in Warcry is bonkers and done wrong, again, even by seasoned players who have topped major events. It reads as follows. Once both players have declared how they will use their wild dice in the battle round, count the number of singles each player has once more. If the player without initiative now has more singles than the player with initiative, they now have the initiative instead. If the number of singles each player has is now tied and was not previously, the players roll off and the winner has initiative. So how initiative works and how many people play this is that if your dice are tied after wild dice allocation, then you roll off to see who has initiative. This is fundamentally false. The only time you get to seize initiative with a roll off is if your ability dice were not tied after that initial roll. If they were tied, say if you both rolled 2 doubles and 2 singles, then the only way to seize initiative is if you gain more dice than your opponent. This gets played wrong in 2 ways. The above way, where people roll off after a tie when they were already tied. It also gets played wrong when people say that tying at any point does not force a roll off for initiative. Both these interpretations are wrong. This rule is incredibly contextual and you need to keep an eye on it. Super common mistake right here. Next up, we have disengaging. Disengaging is one of the least used actions in Warcry because people like to kill things. This often leads to people standing around all day and poking each other with sticks. Disengaging is actually a surprisingly nuanced rule and does not follow normal movement rules. Disengaging reads, if a fighter is within 1 inch of an enemy fighter, they can make a disengage action to move away. When a fighter makes a disengage action, that fighter can move normally up to 3 inches in any direction, but they must finish their action more than 1 inch away from all enemy fighters. If this is impossible, the fighter cannot use the disengage action and must use another action instead. People will often leave it at that and treat disengage as if you were moving normally, only you move 3 inches instead of your regular movement allotment. Welcome to Warcry, kids. You better believe moving normally is a keyword and has its own very specific definition that changes how disengage works. Moving normally reads, During a move action, a fighter can move normally whenever the center of their base is on the battlefield floor or on a platform. When a fighter moves normally, the center of their base must remain on the battlefield floor or a platform at all times, unless they are moving over low terrain. So in the context of an actual game, this means a fighter cannot climb and they cannot jump. The only exception is climbing over low terrain, and that is terrain that is less than 1 inch in height, since you functionally ignore that when moving anyway. This is huge because you can use this to trap enemy models. For example, a ranged unit standing on a platform and then you engage them, they can't disengage if their only exit is climbing down or jumping off. And the same thing would happen if you pin them against a wall. This rule is played wrong all the time. You need to watch out for it. Something newer players often get wrong is reactions, specifically reacting to someone else's reaction. For example, a Gloom Spike Gits player reacts and moves a model into range of a Cruel Boy's Gut Ripper. Normally this would trigger the Gut Ripper's Cunning Trap, resulting in a free attack action. This is, in fact, illegal. This is because of the very first sentence in the rule. Reactions are a thing a fighter can do during an enemy fighter's activation. And that just seals the deal right there. They can only be used in an enemy fighter's activation. By definition, if you are trying to react to a reaction, it is your activation, therefore reacting is impossible. Many players coming from a 40k background will have their mind blown by this revelation. Objectives in Warcry are sticky. This means once you have gained control of an objective at the end of the battle round, it is yours until someone takes it. This means you can walk away from it and it is still yours. This is huge in objective games and should never ever be forgotten. Contesting objectives is also weird in Warcry, as in you can't. Sort of. Objectives have two states, controlled or not controlled. The only time you can contest an objective is if it is not controlled. Once an objective is controlled, at no point can it ever be contested again. You must instead take the objective by having more models on the objective than your opponent. Just being equal does not matter anymore. It will never matter again. It is quite literally all or nothing at this point. There is no middle ground. A tale as old as time is the argument that you can't rampage if you are engaged in combat, and it is fundamentally wrong. The rule reads, this fighter can make a bonus move action up to a number of inches equal to the value of this ability. Then they can make a bonus attack action. So the order is, you move, then you attack, which is true. So if you can't move, this sequence is broken and you can't attack. Standard argument defeated by basic English. Can is optional language. It is synonymous with may. Its definition in this context is you are permitted to do a thing. It is not a requirement in any sense of the word. So you can or you may move, and then you can or you may attack. You can, if you really wanted to, use Rampage and just move or just attack. That being said, you can't attack and then move with Rampage. Ordering still matters, but the sequence does not break if you don't do one of them. Blessings are very powerful tools that can be used to augment your fighters into potentially more powerful versions of themselves. This brings up the question, can monsters use blessings? The short answer is yeah. The long answer is yes, because a monster still counts as a fighter. They are just fighters with the monster rune mark, and this is proven in the actual rulebook under the monster section. You can include one fighter with the monster rune mark. Now, you don't see monsters all too often in Warcry, or I don't at the very least. So what a monster is often causes confusion. Monsters have so many rules assigned to them that considering them fighters is often overlooked. They are though, so bless away. Let's get into some more vague rule interactions before going on to missions. This is a weird one that has come up exactly once for me, but it is bound to come up more often in the future. So this time we are looking at the intricacies of objective control whilst looking at two rules that interact with the fundamental control aspects of the game. We will start with you, Messin. Until control of objectives has been determined at the end of a battle round, enemy fighters with a wounds characteristic of 14 or less are not counted when determining which player controls an objective within 3 inches of this fighter. This is one of the best abilities in the entire game. This is devastating against chaff heavy warbands like pretty much all undead factions and can destroy a board state and swing a game towards players that are using it. But then we have Over My Dead Body. Until the end of the battle round, this fighter counts as 2 additional fighters when determining which player controls an objective. This is another amazing ability. 1 dude now counting as 3 dudes? Awesome. But what if these 2 rules clashed? What if you had a model with 12 wounds using Over My Dead Body at the same time someone had a brute using you, Messin? There are 2 possibilities. Either Over My Dead Body wins and your model still counts as 2 models, although not the usual 3, or you Messin wins and that model counts as 0 models. This is a very weird interaction that can kind of go both ways and does require an FAQ to really sort out. However, the way this works at the moment is you Messin wins. This is because you Messin doesn't specify a number at all. All enemy fighters are not counted. It doesn't matter how many fighters a model counts as, they are not counted at all. The only way for Over My Dead Body to win in this complex matchup is if you start to make incredibly shaky hypothetical arguments surrounding the nature of invisible extra models, which is ludicrous. A key thing to remember is that if you need to add additional words to a rule to make a ruling go in your favor, you are likely not interpreting that rule correctly. Next up, we have Ignite Weapon versus Counter. This one is really cool because I love Ignite Weapon and it does all kinds of weird things when people use Counter. Ignite Weapon does the following. Count 1 miss from the next attack action made by this fighter at this activation as a critical hit instead. Then Counter reads, a fighter can make this reaction after they are targeted by a melee attack action but before the hit rolls are made. For each hit roll from that attack action that misses, allocate 1 damage point to the attacking fighter. For each hit roll of 1, allocate 2 damage points to the attacking fighter instead. So which one wins in this interaction? One counts misses into crits and the other turns misses into damage. So who wins? This might surprise you, but both win. Why is this? Ignite Weapon counts 1 miss as a crit. So if you miss once, you don't miss and you instead crit, and Counter does nothing. Things get weird if you miss multiple times, then you ignore 1 miss and then take the damage from every other miss. So far, so good, so gravy. And all of this is backed up by sequencing rules, which reads, in most cases, rules will be resolved 1 at a time. However, from time to time, rules may appear to come into play at the same time, and it may be unclear as to which is resolved first. If this occurs in the combat phase, the player whose turn it is to activate a fighter chooses the order in which the rules are resolved. In other phases, the player with initiative chooses. In any other case, the players roll off and the winner chooses. What if you roll a 1 though? Do you take the damage or do you ignore it because you turn it into a crit? You do both. You get your crit, but you take 2 damage. This is because Counter is very specific in its wording. If you miss, you take 1 damage, and for each roll of a 1, you allocate 2 damage. Basically, Ignite Weapon turns regular misses into not misses, but since Ignite Weapon does not change the value of the dice, you will take 2 damage if you roll a 1, since you rolled a 1 and it stays a 1. So one last thing about Ignite Weapon before we move on is any reaction that changes crits into hits. This does not work against Ignite Weapon, ever. And again, this comes back to sequencing. specifically because these two interactions happen at the same time, and since you are attacking with Ignite Weapon, it's your turn, it's the combat phase, and you pick the ordering. So how this would work is, you would roll your dice. You would see if you rolled any crits. And let's say in this example, you rolled no crits, and then you rolled a miss. You would then declare that the reaction goes first, the reaction goes off, it does nothing. You would then activate Ignite Weapon's effect after the reaction because of sequencing, and then you'd get a crit. This might sound cheesy because it is, but that's how sequencing works, and this will come up from time to time, and it's very important that you understand the nuances of sequencing and being the person in control of that sequence. Ley Lines is an absolute classic of a mission and a favourite amongst many players. That being said, there are two massive rule mistakes that happen way more often than they should. Firstly, you have the dormant to awakened part of each turn. Many players think Ley Lines forces you to activate an objective every turn. This means that you are forced to have all 5 objectives active by turn 4, and this is false. The rule reads, at the start of each combat phase, the player who does not have initiative can pick one dormant objective to become awakened. And again, the key word here is can. You can do the thing. You have permission to do the thing, but you don't have to do the thing. This means if you don't want to activate an objective because it grants you no advantage, then you don't have to. This is a key part of the Ley Lines experience and a very powerful gambit that you can pull to starve your opponent of points. Secondly, and arguably way more important, is the concept of control. The rule throws around nebulous terms like dormant and awakened, and this gives people the impression that dormant objectives are not objectives, and therefore they can't be controlled. Spoiler, this is not the case at all. Nowhere in the rules for Ley Lines does it state a dormant objective is not an objective, only that awakened objectives are worth points. This means you can take control of objectives that are dormant and that they'll be under your control until someone takes it back. This also means when an objective becomes awakened, it will already be under your control. This has all kinds of ramifications in-game. And remember, objectives are sticky in Warcry as well, so you can swing by an objective turn 1, move away turn 2, and then awaken at turn 3, and it's still yours. This invisible, behind-the-scenes game in Ley Lines is super funky and key if you want to dominate the mission. Some of these mistakes I have made in the distant past, but this mistake is one I made at Warhammer World, and it cost me dearly. Hidden Vault is an objective-based mission that slowly removes objectives over time. The winner is the person who holds the objective at the end of the game. Easy, right? Well, yeah, it is. But imagine a sleep-deprived toast who hasn't played Hidden Vault in months, going in with the old assumption problem, and then things start to go wrong. Unlike Ley Lines, where initiative determines who turns on objectives, in Hidden Vault you roll off. But there is one roll-off only, and that reads, at the end of the first battle round, the players roll off. The winner picks one objective and then removes the objective from play. At the end of the second battle round, the opposing player does the same. This is not how we played this mission at all. In my game, we rolled off at the end of turn 1 and at the end of turn 2, my opponent won both roll-offs and therefore had complete control over the battlefield instead of us having equal control. How did this impact the game? Well, it meant that my brute boss was too far away to use Messin since he turned off both objectives closest to the boss. In reality, I would have kept one of those active so the brute could dominate his point and possibly nab the win. This was entirely my fault, so me losing is 100% deserved. Do not mistake me explaining the situation as me making excuses. No. It is important to own your mistakes, and I own this one. It's easy to assume, as many players did at Warhammer World, and I am sure Aitan can back this statement up if he's around, that content creators are always right. That is because we produce content, therefore we can't make mistakes. We make mistakes. I am sure every content creator on this platform and beyond can pull up countless examples of small rules errors they've made in games, and that's fine. Everyone is human. Will I get Hidden Vault wrong again? Probably not. This was a learning experience. I made a mistake, I lost the game, and now I can take that, I can own that, and I can grow as a player. Cursed Prize is one of the most awkward missions in the entire game, and it comes courtesy of White Dwarf 490, and it reads as follows. The treasure token or the fighter carrying the treasure may deal curse damage. When the treasure token or the fighter carrying the treasure deals curse damage to a fighter, allocate a number of damage points to that fighter equal to half their remaining wounds rounding down. A fighter's remaining wounds are found by subtracting the damage points allocated to that fighter from that fighter's wound characteristic. A fighter carrying the treasure can use the Life Leech curse ability. Pick a visible enemy fighter within 8 inches of this fighter. This fighter deals curse damage to that fighter. Then remove a number of damage points allocated to this fighter equal to half the number allocated to that enemy fighter by this ability rounding down. When a fighter drops the treasure token deals curse damage to that fighter. At the beginning of each battle round, the treasure token deals curse damage to each fighter within 3 inches. If the treasure token is being carried, instead the fighter carrying the treasure token deals curse damage to themselves. They then allocate the same amount of damage to each other fighter within 3 inches. If Cursed Prize sounds bonkers, it's because it is. It is incredibly wordy. I am positive most people glazed over that. And that's because it's not the easiest mission to pass on a first or even second pass. And this is entirely down to curse damage being rather complex in addition to being incredibly contextual. Let's break this one down. Curse damage, in all but one situation, deals damage based on the fighter who is taking the damage. Half their remaining wounds to be specific. So if a model with 15 wounds and a model with 30 wounds were standing next to the treasure, but the treasure was not being carried, they would take 8 and 15 damage respectively. If the treasure carrier was to use the ability Life Leech Curse, the curse damage is based on the targeted fighter, not the fighter holding the treasure. So again, if a 15 wound model was holding the treasure and then used Life Leech on a 30 wound model, that model would take 15 wounds worth of damage, and in this case, it would heal the treasure carrier 8 wounds. The only time curse damage works differently is at the beginning of the battle round, and only if the treasure is being carried. In this instance, curse damage deals damage to the carrier equal to half of their wounds, as per usual. However, the exact damage is then handed out to every other model within 3 inches. You don't half the wounds of everyone targeted. This is the most goofed mission Games Workshop currently has in its matched play rotation, and it is far too wordy for its own good. It causes an awful lot of confusion, and then that confusion often transitions into feels bad moments, which is not a fun time. Another White Dwarf mission, and one that is bound to cause confusion because it's not entirely clear how the tally mechanic works if your great champion dies. None of that makes sense yet, of course, so let's look at the mission for some context. When a player's fighter makes an attack action that takes the target down, if that player does not have a great champion on the battlefield, that player can nominate that fighter as their great champion. Each player should keep a tally of the damage allocated to enemies by their great champion. At the end of the battle round, starting with the player with the initiative, if a player's great champion is on the battlefield, each enemy fighter within 4 inches of the battlefield edge is taken down and their wounds characteristic is added to the great champion's tally. This does not affect other great champions. The battle ends after 4 battle rounds. When the battle ends, the player whose great champion on the battlefield has the highest tally wins. Any other result is a draw. So where's the confusion? Well, it's all about that tally. What if you kill someone's great champion and then they make a new great champion? Is their tally reset to 0? There is a lot of language that could imply that in the right light, namely the heavy use of great champion in a singular context. For example, by their great champion. The great champion's tally, as in champions with an apostrophe, not plural. Or the player whose great champion has the highest tally. a lot of this is implying that any tally gained is assigned to just one champion. If that champion dies, then surely the tally is erased and you make a new tally when a new great champion ascends, right? No, this is very nebulously worded, but when in doubt, don't add rules and don't add words to fit your ruling. Nowhere does it say to erase a tally, only that you add to your tally in X number of ways. If your champion dies, make a new champion and then add to the continued tally. The only way to erase a tally is to kill a champion and then they don't get to ascend a new champion. This is because of the last rule. When the battle ends, the player whose champion on the battlefield has the highest tally wins. If you don't have a living champion, your tally doesn't count at all. Functional erasure, but not in the way many players seem to play this mission. I have done an awful lot of talking, and now I want to throw this one to the community and see if they can tell me how the following rule works. It's a monster killer's rule and it's called Storm Up. Pick a visible enemy fighter within 2 inches of this fighter and roll a number of dice equal to the value of this ability to a minimum of 2. If you can make a group of 2 or more dice in consecutive numerical order, excluding any duplicates, allocate 3 damage points to the chosen fighter for each dice in that group. So the question is this: does this rule allow the making of multiple groups or not? So for example, if I rolled 6 dice and I got a 1, 2 2s, a 4, a 5 and a 6, could I make a group consisting of 1 and 2 and then a second group consisting of 4, 5 and 6? If no, why? Let's push this further. If I rolled 6 dice and rolled 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, could I make 2 groups both containing 1, 2 and 3? Let me know down below, because this is one of the weirdest abilities to come out in recent memory and it's not easy to pass. But that's all I have for this video. Let me know in the comment section below if you have any weird rules you need help with or any rules you think are often done wrong. You never know, I might make another video like this in the future. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe. And if you want to help fund future Warcry endeavors, then please consider signing up to my Patreon or my YouTube members like these amazing people: Armoire Enthusiast 7, Brioche, Head Knight of Paint, Kitty Cowan Prakamakul, Long Run Hobbies, and Lord Filax. Until next time, lads, ladies, and everybody in between and beyond, I will catch you in the next video. Ta-ra.